Hello, welcome to Back at Maths. This week I'm going to be teaching you how to choose method when solving a quadratic equation. This kind of question comes up a lot in GCSE papers, and you might be at a point in your revision where you're not entirely sure how to solve something like this, or you could solve it, but you're not entirely sure which of the 3 different methods to solve a quadratic you should use. The 3 different methods to solve any quadratic formula are factorising, completing the square, or using the quadratic equation. Sometimes you might be lucky and the examiners have sort of guided you towards a particular method, like in this question here. If they don't do that, then choosing a method is a bit harder, so let's go through the different rules and the best ways to choose a method. Rule number 1, factorising is always the best way to go. To factorise, we need to make sure that the numbers work, in that we need 2 numbers to times together to make positive 15 and add or subtract to make minus 8. And we also need the number at the beginning to be low. I won't go into too much detail about the methods because I have separate videos for these, but I will go over a brief summary. We want 2 numbers to times together to make plus 15, so I have 2 factor pairs, 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. I can make either of these numbers positive or minus, but they have to add or subtract to make minus 8. 1 and 15 doesn't work, but if I make both 3 and 5 a minus, then that will make a minus 8. So my set of brackets will be x minus 3 and x minus 5. To get my solutions for x from here, I take them out of the brackets, but I change the sign. So x either equals positive 3 or x equals positive 5. Rule number 2, if factorising does not work, try completing the square. You will be able to complete the square if there is a 1 in front of your equation, which there is, and if the term in the middle is even. So then to complete the square, I halve the number in front of my middle term, and put an x plus that number in a set of brackets and square them. Then I square whatever number I've put into my brackets, which is 3, so I'm going to square that to make 9, and I take that away. Then I add on whatever is left from the equation, so I add on a positive 1 at the end. When simplified, a minus 9 and a positive 1 is minus 8. And to solve any quadratic equation, it needs to equal 0, so we'll add that in now. Next, I want to move my minus 8 onto the other side of the equal sign, and to do that I change its sign, so it will be a positive 8. And then I want to square root the left-hand side, so x plus 3 squared will just be x plus 3. And then I square root the other side. Remember, when completing the square, you need to make sure it is a plus or a minus the square root of 8, because it could be 2 negative numbers times together to make that positive, or it could be 2 positive numbers. Next, I want to make x the subject, so I'm going to move the 3 over to the other side of the equals by changing its sign. And then that means that x either equals a minus 3 plus the square root of 8, or x equals minus 3 minus the square root of 8. And you can just put both of these into your calculator to find the answers. Rule number 3, if all else fails, use the quadratic formula. I'm going to put this up in the right hand corner, but remember that you will need to memorise this for the exam, so it's good to get used to trying to recall that now. Another hint is that they've asked you to give the solution correct to 3 significant figures. If they've asked you to do that, it's a really strong indication that they want you to use the quadratic formula, because the other 2 methods probably wouldn't get you to such a specific number. Remember, to solve any quadratic formula, I need it to equal to 0, so I'm going to move the 12 onto the other side of the equal sign by changing its sign to a negative. Next, I want to label A, B and C. A will be whatever is in front of x squared, so that's a 1. B will be whatever is in front of your x, so positive 5. And C will be the number at the end, so minus 12. Next, I want to rewrite my quadratic equation, but I'm going to replace all of the A's, B's and C's with the numbers that we've just written down. And then when I simplify that, I will get minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 48, because minus 4 times minus 12 is a positive 48, and then all of that divided by 2. This means that x either equals minus 5 plus the square root of 73 and all of that divided by 2, or x equals minus 5, take away the square root of 73 and all of that divided by 2. And that is how you use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. Before we go on to a summary, I just want to go over a few exam tips. Firstly, it's really important to remember that sometimes the examiners will give you a quadratic formula in a different format. For example, here you're given something that looks different to a quadratic equation, but essentially it's just completing the square with the first few steps done for you. If you continue with your completing the square method, you will get to the answer. Also, remember that when you are square rooting both sides, the square root of a positive could be a minus times a minus, not just a positive times a positive. So you have to have plus or minus the square root of that number. Another tip would be to be very careful when using the quadratic formula, that you are dividing everything by 2a and not just the second half of the equation. A lot of students make the mistake of only dividing part of that equation by 2a and not the entire thing. So the more you practice this equation, the less you'll go wrong. Lastly, if they put the equation into context, such as asking you to calculate x, where x is the number of seconds taken to run 10 meters. In this case, your x cannot be a negative, so the final answer will only be your positive x value. Some examiners will deduct marks if you give a negative value, so be really careful here. Okay, so in summary, if you are asked to solve a quadratic equation, you should always try and factorise before anything else. If this doesn't work, complete the square if there is nothing in front of your x squared and the number in front of your x is even. If neither of these methods are appropriate, then use the quadratic equation. Great, so that is it. Thank you so much for your time. Please hit that subscribe button and have a lovely week.